Allah bless these fundraisers. It's not an easy task standing in front and getting rejected and getting looks and eyes rolled and standing up there and pleading. And especially when you've been away from your family and kids for a month. So thank you. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Dr. Gabor is in the house. Round of applause for him. He's coming up on stage right now. I just met with him, and his book, The Myth of Normal, was just released in Arabic. So he gave me 3 copies that he signed off. So I'm just going to quickly auction these off, and I'll start them at $100. I have 3 books. So if anybody wants this in Arabic, this is courtesy of Dr. Gabor, who just signed it. It's signed as well. And if we can get someone starting at $100 a hand there, that's 100. Do I have 200? 200. Do I have 300? Another hand. Volunteers help me out because there's some lights in my eyes. We're at 300, 400. 400. Another hand. Another hand. 400. Just yell at me, scream at me if you have to. 400 going once. 400 going twice. Who was the 400 hand? Sold. Round of applause. Thank you so much. Let's do that for round number 2. There's a second book here. We'll start at 100 again. $100. 1. 100 going once. Was that a hand in the back? 100. 200. 200. 300. 300. 400. 500. 500. Any other hands? 500. 500. Going once. Going twice. 500 sold to the sister in the back. Thank you so much for your donation. Okay, so we started at 400, then 500. Let's take this to a little bit higher. Okay, last book of the night, Dr. Gabor's The Myth of the Normal, which was released in Arabic, written by Dr. Gabor Maté and his son, Daniel Maté. And it's signed and autographed. I just got it done. If you want pictures and proof, we have that as well. Start at 100. Do I have $100? 100. 200. 200. 300. 300. Can you just wave at me, the 300? I can't see who it was. I just saw a hand up. 300? Or are we still at 200? 200. Where's 300? Do I have a 300? 300. Okay. Do I have a 400? 400. 400 going once. 400 going twice. Just slow down the clock. Okay, Sheikh, 300 for you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your patience. Thank you all for supporting. The Muslim fundraisers for those non-Muslims are a little unorthodox, okay? So I apologize to all of our non-Muslim friends, brothers and sisters. We're a little overwhelming, so welcome to our world. And apologies unconditionally. I'm going to pass it back to Sheikh Anis, and we're ready for Dr. Gabor.
So before we call upon Dr. Gabor, I just want to let the guests know that he will be speaking for half an hour, and the remaining half an hour will be given for question and answers. So Dr. Gabor is a renowned speaker, a best-selling author, and is highly sought after for his expertise on a range of topics, including addiction, stress, and childhood development. Rather than offering quick-fix solutions to these complex issues, Dr. Maté weaves together scientific research, case histories, and his own insights and experience to present a broad perspective that enlightens and empowers people to promote their own healing and that of those around them. After 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience, Dr. Maté worked for over a decade in Vancouver's downtown east side with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. So let's all of us give him a warm welcome, Dr. Gabor.
stop the music. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm very impressed with the auction. I mean, $400 for one of my books. My publisher is selling it for a lousy $40. You know, so I'm gonna tell them that maybe they should up the price a little bit. Yeah, that book has been published in 42 languages now, and the most recent edition is in Arabic. Look, I'm here to. Can you hear me first of all at the back? Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. Is that a yes or a no? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So. It's a very difficult topic that I want to talk to you about. Anybody who follows the news and actually goes beyond what the Western media reports on YouTube or on TikTok or watches Al Jazeera or watches any number of international reporting venues knows that there's incredible suffering going on in Gaza right now. And I don't care what your political views are. I mean, I don't care where you stand on the political spectrum. But if you can look at that and not have your heart broken, then I want to know where your heart is. Because what do you do when you see children, 2-year-olds, having to have their limbs amputated without anesthetic? Because the occupying power doesn't let in medicines. What do you do when you see children starving because the occupying power doesn't let in food? And I don't care what the justification is. And even if you think politically they have the right to do it, what's in your heart when you watch this happening? What's in your heart when on YouTube you see a child starving? So around the world, there's a tremendous heaviness, and I travel around the world. I travel internationally, and wherever I go, a lot of people who are at all connected to what's going on have a sense of heaviness, have a sense of despair. They have a sense of hopelessness. They have a sense of helplessness, because it's not like they haven't been protests. It's not like people are unaware, but it's going on, and it continues to go on. And personally, I've been speaking about this issue for a long time, but I know, and this is true for not just for me, but for anybody who's been active on this issue, all the speaking we have done, and all the petitioning, and all the appeals to governments, internationally or locally, have not saved a single finger of a single Palestinian child. So the heartbrokenness is inevitable. So how do we deal with all this? Well, I'm going to say to you that there's no reason to give up. And then I'll talk about that closer to the end. But it was mentioned about my work that I'm a retired doctor now. I'm no longer work as a physician, but my work has been with trauma and the impacts of trauma on physical and mental health. And without going into any great details, I can tell you that many physical health issues, from autoimmune disease to malignancy, are often rooted in or have a strong contribution from childhood trauma. And I can give you examples. Or even adult trauma. Now this is an Israeli study that was done some years ago. Parents who lost an adult child to war or accident have increased risk for malignancy. The stress of losing a child, an adult child. A study in Denmark showed that parents who lose a child have double the risk of multiple sclerosis. An American study has shown that women with severe post-traumatic stress disorder have double the risk of ovarian cancer. American studies have shown that the more episodes of racism an American black woman has to endure, the greater her risk for asthma. Canadian studies have shown that men sexually abused in childhood have triple the risk of heart disease. I could go on. But what I'm talking about is the inevitable connection between trauma, stress, and mental and physical health. Studies have shown that the more traumatic experiences a child endures, exponentially the greater their risk for addiction, for psychosis, for attention deficit disorder, for any number of mental health issues. Now, what do you think is going to happen in Gaza, even if this terrible conflict ends? Well, we know what's going to happen. Because in 2004, there was a study internationally on the effects of war on children and of trauma. And at that, this is 2004. And if anybody thinks that history began on October the 7th, 2023, they just don't know their history. Because this study was done in 2004, before Hamas took power in Gaza. It showed that 97.5% of Gazan children 23 years ago now had symptoms of post-traumatic stress, many of them severely. A large percentage wet their beds. They had nightmares. They were aggressive towards their parents. Why? Because the parent's job is to protect the child. When the parent can't protect the child loses respect for the parent, and they become aggressive towards them. This is 2004, before the repeated bombings of Gaza, and certainly before the current conflict. I mentioned bedwetting. I wet my bed till I was 13 years of age. I was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1944. I'm not going to go into any great details, but I spent the first year of my life under Nazi occupation and in constant threat that I wasn't aware of, but my mother was, of us being sent to the camps and dying. And my mother was in a terrible state, as you can imagine, after her parents were sent to Auschwitz. Her stresses were absorbed by me, because that's what kids do. They absorb the stresses of their parents. They can't help it. Studies have shown that the more stressed parents are, the more likely the children are to have asthma. Because the parents' emotional stress affects the physiology of the child. So my nervous system was heavily affected by that first year under Nazi occupation. When I was 8 years of age, my mother took me to a psychologist for my bedwetting. And the psychologist took a history and what happened to this kid in his first year of life, and much more happened than I've told you about. And then he said to my mom, and I remember being in the room with the psychologist, and he said to my mom, "Madam, if the only problem this kid has is that he wets his beds, you were very fortunate." Well, that wasn't the only problem I had. I had severe depression in my 40s, all kinds of issues. I've written about them, I've talked about them. I've had a lot of work to heal my stuff. But what do you think is going to happen to these kids in Gaza? If they survive, and if their society even survives. Now, that's one kind of trauma when it happens to, and more recently, there was another study in the Middle East, mostly in Syria. They looked at children under the impact of the war that's been going on in Syria for years now. And the genetic functioning of these kids had been affected by war trauma. In other words, how the genes function is actually affected by the environment. So we can expect, I can tell you something else. There was, after 9/11, There was a study of mothers who'd been pregnant during 9/11 and who suffered post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of 9/11 during their pregnancy. A year later, those infants still had abnormal stress hormone levels, which means they were much more prone to mental health problems and physical health problems later on. So we don't have to be geniuses to predict what's going to happen. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, that Israelis were not traumatized by October the 7th. Sure they were. Of course they were. It was a terrible day for them. And things happened that shouldn't have happened. Nobody's arguing that. But we're talking about the ongoing devastation that's been visited upon the Palestinians ever since. And not, by the way, just in Gaza, but in the West Bank. Did you know that in the West Bank, since the ceasefire 2 months ago, just since 2 months ago, 40,000 Palestinians have been expelled from their homes in the West Bank, and they've been told never to return? 40,000 in 2 months. And for the past number of months, almost every day, 2 Palestinian children have been killed. Not talking about adults, I'm talking about kids, including babies. In the West Bank, I'm not talking about Gaza. That's the situation. And our media doesn't talk about it. Let me tell you something. There's this terrible war going on in the Ukraine, and we all feel bad about it. And very few people believe that there's any justification for that war. Now, we can debate what led to the war and what triggered it, but there's that war going on. Last year, maybe a few months ago, the Russians bombed a Ukrainian city. I don't think it was Kyiv, but somewhere, and a bomb hit a children's hospital, and several children were killed. The international outrage, justified, was of course very open and very vociferous. Where's the outrage when Palestinian hospitals are deliberately bombed? Where's the outrage when the head of surgery at Al-Shifa Hospital, a very healthy, very humane, very active, very fit, 50-year-old orthopedic surgeon is captured by the Israelis and is tortured to death? And he died with broken ribs and is naked below the waist. This wasn't even reported in the Western press. Right now, there are according to Israeli reports, there are 250 health professionals in Israeli prisons without charges. And many of them are tortured. This is according to Israeli reports, including an organization called Israeli Physicians for Human Rights. Ultimately, this is not an issue of Jews versus Arabs or Jews versus Palestinians. It's a human issue. Last night I participated in an event with 2 Israelis, young people, one of them 19, the other is 20. The 19-year-old spent 6 months in a prison because he refused to fight in Gaza, because he said that revenge is not the way and that the occupation will never lead to peace. And he's Jewish. He grew up in Israel with the same ideological education, to put it mildly, that everybody else receives. But he stood up and he said no. And I can also tell you something that's never been reported in Canada. Never been reported in Canada. I can name, well, I can't remember all their names, but I can name several, and I can tell you at least 6 or 8 Israeli, Jewish, internationally known historians of genocide and Holocaust who have all served in the Israeli Defense Forces, they have called what's going on genocide. But here in Vancouver, if you say that, you're accused of blood libel. These are Israeli Jews, again, who served, some of them as officers in the Israeli army, and they're calling it genocide. But here you're not supposed to talk about it. Here, if you talk about it, you're an anti-Semite. Now, in British Columbia, we had a case of a government minister, Selena Robinson, and she was head of higher education in the NDP government. Remember what she said last year? She said that prior to the Jewish immigration into Palestine, Palestine was a crappy little country. Her words, not mine. A crappy little country. Now imagine if anybody in Canada would dare to say to the indigenous people here that before the coming of the Europeans, yours was a crappy little country. What would the outcry be? What would the outrage be? She was finally forced to resign from the government, and ever since then, she's made a career out of complaining about anti-Semitism. How the government is anti-Semitic because they forced her out after she made that utterly ignorant and racist statement. But she can complain about anti-Semitism. So look, let me look at my notes here a little bit, because I'm going to speak for a few more minutes. There's the trauma then that people there are experiencing. Let's talk about the trauma here. Because there's something called moral injury. And moral injury happens when you're watching something terrible happen and you can't stop it. And you're helpless in the face of it. As I said earlier, it's impossible to have your eyes open and not to have your heart broken. So I hope your hearts are broken. And I hope they're broken every day. Because what's going on happens every day. This week, when predictably the ceasefire was ended by Israel, I say predictably because it's happened so many times before. And then the very first night, nearly 200 children were killed. In one night, 200 children. What's it like to watch that and to know about it? And what's it like to be intimidated from even speaking about it? Because if you speak about it, you're either a self-hating Jew, which is what they say about me, or people like me, or you're an anti-Semite if you're not Jewish. So not only is this horror unfolding in front of our eyes, but we're even intimidated and forbidden to talk about it, to call it out, to name it for what it is, to name it for what these Israeli Jewish scholars have called it. What's it like? That sense of helplessness, that sense of frustration. So that's what people have to deal with. So look, here's what I would say to you. It's true what I said, that all the speaking that I've done or other people have done internationally, all the advocacy that you may have done, all the letter writing and petitions that you may have signed, have not saved a single finger of a single Gazan child. Some might say that we have failed. Don't believe that for 1 second. You have not failed. I can name you some great failures in history. I could name you the Buddha, who talked about compassion and wisdom and awareness 2,500 years ago. How's that going in the world? I can talk about Jesus, who talked about forgiveness. Do unto others as you would do, you'd have them do unto you. By the way, in saying that, he was literally quoting the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. It's in Deuteronomy, one of the 5 books of Moses. So don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. How's that going? I could talk about the great prophet of the Muslims in his teachings. You know, in the Quran it says that God will only change a man if he's willing to change himself. How's it going? Peace, truth, devotion to something greater than our little ego. How's that going in the world? You can say these people have totally failed. Have they? Where would the world be without their teachings? Where would the world be without the truths that they have spread in the world? Where would the world be without the light of truth, the torch of truth that they've held up against the darkness? So are they failures? They're not. There's a long-term situation here. This is going to go on for a long time yet. I'm very, very how should I say this? In the short term, I think the Palestinian people are going to be tormented much more, because that's how the power relationships line up in the world. Because the most powerful countries in the world are supporting their displacement and their suffering and their suppression. You know how it works? At the time when on TikTok and on YouTube you could see these horrific images of skeletal Palestinian children starving to death, the New York Times had an article in their Sunday edition about a caviar farm in Israel where they grow fish and they harvest caviar, and how bravely the workers at this caviar farm, despite the war, continued to go to work to make sure that the caviar exports will continue. Can you think of anything more obscene than to celebrate a caviar farm in Israel when kids in Gaza are starving to death? And that's the world that we live in. And that's how it is. But you know what? The world's been that way for a long time. There's always been this oscillation between lighter time and darker times. And at times it seems that the darkness will prevail. But ultimately it never does. And the very fact that in the face of all the propaganda and all the withholding of truth, so many people's hearts are broken, that's a sign, that's a tribute to humanity. And if your heart is broken, that's a tribute to you. So there's a longer term issue here, which is, there was a great Jewish rabbi who lived 100 years before Jesus, Rabbi Hillel. And he said that the task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it. Now that's a calling. And he's saying, you're not going to stop. He's talking about justice, truth, peace, love in the world, the healing of the world. The Hebrew phrase, tikkun olam, healing the world, is one of the beautiful Jewish commandments. And there's such beauty in every spiritual tradition. And so he said, the task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it. What he's saying is, don't be attached to the outcome. The fact that your efforts don't seem to produce the results that you want and that your heart wants right now doesn't mean that you're failing. Because by speaking out, by not allowing yourself to be intimidated, by not allowing yourself to be told that you're anti-Semite if you speak the truth about Palestine. Now, you know, is there anti-Semitism? Of course there's anti-Semitism. There's racism of all kinds. And we have seen what terrible results that produces everywhere. There's also tremendous anti-Muslim sentiment in this world. Islamophobia is much more of a practical issue in North America than anti-Semitism is. And I'm saying that not in any way minimizing anti-Semitism. Racism against indigenous people in this country is a huge issue. We always do the land acknowledgements in this country. I'm sure you did one tonight when they opened this meeting. Okay, we do the land acknowledgement, but you know what's the reality in Canada? The reality in Canada is indigenous women make up 5% of the female population. They make up 70% of the jail population. 70%. And we live with this. We barely even talk about it. But what is that if not an outcome of racism? Of the trauma that was visited upon the indigenous people here, and how that they made them behave in ways that now they're being punished for. So we punish the people that we hurt. So racism is not a one nation issue. It's a general issue. And we need to stand up against anti-Semitism, real anti-Semitism which exists, just as much as we need to stand up in the face of Islamophobia, which has been fought now for decades as the Western world seeks to dominate the Islamic world. Naturally, there's all kinds of conflict, and both sides can do terrible things to each other. But racism is not a one nation issue. Never again is not a tribal slogan. It's a universal slogan. It applies to everybody. And even if you feel brokenhearted and helpless and hopeless and in despair, don't let that get to you, because you have a larger goal here, which is to contribute to the light and the truth in the world as best you see it. And that is a long-term struggle. It's a long-term calling, and all of us can contribute to it. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so as you can see right here in the back, if you have questions that you would like to submit, you can use the QR code. So we have the first question here. Dr. Gabor, what gives you hope?
I don't have hope. And let me explain that. Hope is my wish that something is going to be different in the future. It might be, it might not be, but there's no point hoping. But I'm much more interested in this possibility. And possibility is not in the future, it's in the present. What's possible is for people to educate themselves. What's possible is for people to stand up for what is right, for what they think is right. What is possible is for people to support each other. What is possible for all of us, if we see it that way, to provide support to, right now, the very tormented Palestinian people, and to those Israelis, those few, but those blessed ones, like the 2 soldiers I met with last night, who are willing to stand up for what is true and what is best in the Jewish tradition. So that's what's possible. I'm much more interested in what's possible right now than what to hope for in the future. I don't spend much time hoping for something better in the future. I'm interested in what's possible in the present moment.
Thank you. Okay, we have a second question here. How can we deal with the trauma of witnessing this genocide and feeling helpless?
Okay, so we have to distinguish something here. Sadness is a feeling. Anger is a feeling. Brokenheartedness, grief is a feeling. You know, our brains are wired for a whole range of emotions. From the point of view of evolution, our brains are wired for love, for caring, for anger, for curiosity, seeking, for grief, for sadness. Why are we wired for these? Because we need these emotions for survival. Not only we wired for them, mammals or in general are wired for these brain circuits. So anger, grief, those are feelings. When you say, I feel helpless, that's not a feeling. It's a belief. You believe you're helpless. Well, the reason is that the distinction is important. I don't argue with anybody's feelings. If somebody says, I feel angry, I don't say to them, no, you don't. Somebody says, I feel sadness or grief, I don't say to them, no, you don't. But if they say, I believe I'm helpless, that belief can be examined. Are you really helpless? Or is there something that you can do? Can you contribute to some cause you believe in? Can you call some other people and talk to them about how you see things? Can you contact Vancouver City government and tell them that their definition of anti-Semitism is total nonsense? Because they define anti-Semitism as criticism of Israel. Can you do that? And if you can do that, it's not true that you're helpless. So what I'm saying is, that's not a feeling, it's a belief. And nobody actually is helpless when you think about it that way.
Thank you, Doctor. What kind of support or global response do you believe is necessary to help the Palestinian children begin to heal?
Well, you know, I visited Palestine 3 years ago. I was in Gaza in 1992. I used to be a Zionist. I used to believe in the Zionist dream. I used to believe that this Jewish state with its army and its borders is the antidote to the persecution of my own people and the response to what happened to my family and millions of other families in Eastern Europe. And then I began to find out that, there's another reality there. That there's actually, the Jewish dream was established at the cost of imposing a nightmare on the population of Palestine, the Nakba. Once I found that out, I started being disillusioned with the Zionist dream. And by the way, disillusioned, nobody likes to be disillusioned. But as I point out in the book, The Myth of Normal, would you rather be illusioned or disillusioned? Would you rather believe in things that are not true, or would you rather know the truth? So being disillusioned is not a bad thing. So by 1992, when I visited Gaza, I went to the Jabalia refugee camp, which has been totally devastated now in the last few months. I went to Jenin refugee camp, which is in the West Bank, which has been totally devastated now in the last couple of months. And I cried every day for 2 weeks. And then 3 years ago, in May of 2022, I was in the West Bank, working with women and I was invited there by Israeli psychologists, by the way, Jewish Israeli psychologists, amongst others. And I worked with women, Palestinian women, who've been tortured in Israeli jails. Now when we talk about the Jewish hostages, yeah, nobody had any right to abduct civilians, old people, children. Nobody had any right to do that on October 7th. But you know what? There are hundreds of Palestinian children in Israeli jails. You can be 13 years old and spend 6 years in an Israeli jail for posting a slogan against the occupation. What about the 10,000 Palestinian hostages? And when I was in Palestine working with these women who'd been tortured in Israeli jails, and let me tell you, Israelis are really good at torturing Palestinians. And I'm saying this not from Palestinian reports, not that that shouldn't be good enough, but from the reports of Israeli doctors who work with Palestinian prisoners. And I was told that there's no post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. It's going on every day, which it is, and it has been for years and years and years and years. So when they ask, how do you, the healing of Palestinian children, you can't heal in the middle of this carnage. You can't heal. Who do you think, those young men who broke into Israel on October the 7th, and some of them did some really cruel things. I'm not justifying that for 1 second. But who do you think they were? They were the same traumatized kids who were identified in 2004. In the middle of this constant assault on your very existence and on your family, I mean, you can read Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, every day they report how the army broke into another Palestinian home in the West Bank and shot another kid or another teenager. You can't heal in the middle of that. Now, in terms of international pressure, the problem is that as long as the major powers, and in this case the United States and its faithful followers like Canada, by the way, Justin Trudeau, our former Prime Minister, he said, I'm a Zionist. He says, we support Israel because we have the same values. Yeah, that's true. We do. Both countries were based on the occupation of a land that was already populated and on the suppression of those people and then the robbery of their resources. We do share the same values. What's interesting, what's interesting is that Justin Trudeau's brother, Sasha, is a filmmaker. And he made a film about Palestine about 20 years ago, telling the truth. And I personally know that Sasha, the brother, talked to his brother Justin, who later became Prime Minister. So Justin has no justification for not knowing what's going on. But as long as the United States and its faithful followers, at least on the international level, like Canada and Britain. I mean, think about it. You go to Britain, and you go to Trafalgar Square, or you go to Westminster Abbey, and there's all these monuments to mass murderers. People that have killed hundreds of thousands of blacks and Muslims and Arabs and indigenous people in Latin America. And they're the heroes with their statues and their monuments in the churches. I'm talking about the colonial world. As long as the colonial world dominates the way it does right now, which is, by the way, fading rapidly, and it's only a question of time, but as long as the colonial world dominates, the international community, so-called, is not going to do very much for the Palestinians, which makes it all the more important. And here, even here in British Columbia, some teachers would like to talk about the Nakba. Now, it's illegal in this country to deny the Holocaust. Now, I don't believe in that law. I think there should be no laws about speech. But it is illegal in this country to deny the Holocaust. It's not illegal to deny the extirpation of the indigenous population in this country. You can lie about that all you want. Nor is it illegal to deny the Nakba. Well, let's make a law. It should be against the law to deny history. Everybody's history. But what I'm saying is that as long as that dominates the international community, by which, if we mean the governments, they're not going to do much, if anything. All the more important that organizations, Muslim, Christian, Jewish organizations that see it differently, and there are such organizations. There's Independent Jewish Voices in Canada. There's Jewish Voices for Peace in the United States. In Baltimore, in May, there's going to be a conference of Jewish Voices for Peace. There'll be 2,000 people there. Most of them will be young Jews. So what I'm saying is that precisely because the governments are the way they are, it's all the more important that civil organizations, that individual people, that advocacy, community groups, that they step in and do what they can. I know we're coming to the end now. I'm going to... no, there's still a few minutes. Okay,
yeah,
good.
we have about maybe one more.
Oh, yeah, but then, because I want to make a statement at the end, but let's take more questions.
Sure. How do conflict-impacted communities navigate the guilt of surviving?
The guilt of surviving. Can you explain a bit more about that? Oh, yeah, okay, survival guilt. Well, I've talked to Palestinians who said that they feel guilty. Like I've talked to Palestinians who live in Israel, and they feel guilty because their people are being slaughtered and they're surviving. Survival's guilt is already very well known in the Jewish community, that people who survived the Holocaust or people who, second generation, they felt a lot of guilt for the survival of they felt a lot of guilt that they belonged to a generation that escaped the Holocaust. What I say to people is, guilt is not a very helpful state of mind. Now, there's healthy remorse. If I promise to show up here and give you a talk, and I stay home and get drunk instead, which is not much danger of that, I don't drink, but let's say I did that, then tomorrow I should feel some remorse. That's healthy. So if I do something that I shouldn't have, or if I don't do something that I should have, then remorse is a healthy response. Oh yeah, that wasn't right what I did. I gotta take responsibility for it. But when it comes to guilt or survival, what exactly did you do that was wrong? You did nothing. So turn that survival's guilt into not, there's something wrong with me because I survived, but I survived, thank God, what can I do now? Make it active. Sorry? It's fine, yeah. Well, how much do you want? Yeah.
Okay, we'll do one more. How do we build bridges with those who are deeply entrenched in their beliefs and Zionism, including our politicians?
Well, I'm not sure what beliefs our politicians have, other than the desire to hold on to power. And I know there are exceptions, honorable exceptions, but you know what? I once spoke with a BC politician, a leader of the Green Party, and she said that the only way you can stay ethical in politics is if you don't care about being re-elected. Because as soon as being re-elected becomes your primary goal, you're going to make all kinds of moral compromises. And that means you're going to be side with those people who've got the funds to support you or the funds to defeat you. In the United States, heaven help any politicians that stands up for Palestinian rights, for example. Millions of dollars are going to be poured into defeating you, and it's happened repeatedly. In Canada, I mentioned in British Columbia, some teachers would like to teach the Nakba, just as a matter of historical fact, just as the Holocaust is and should be taught in the schools. But they're being challenged in the courts by people who've got the money to mount these legal challenges. So I'm not sure how to get through to politicians on these issues. I'm happy if anybody wants to listen, but I go back to that as to the, look, when I was a Zionist, and it really meant the world to me, it would have taken you a long time to get me to even listen to you if you tried to tell me something else. that would have undermined my identification and my sense of who I was and my sense of duty to my own people. And like any ideology, people, once they fall under the spell of an ideology, they rule out aspects of reality that doesn't fit with the ideology. This is true for a lot of people. It's not a Jewish question as such. And I quoted the Quran before, where it says that God only changes those human beings who want to change. So as long as people don't want to change, and as long as a glimpse of reality doesn't, as long as a little shaft of light doesn't fall upon their hearts, you can't bring them alongside. Facts will go nowhere. Reality will go nowhere, because emotionally they're incapable of accepting it. Here's what I want to say, and this is what I'll finish with. Having said that, sometimes when I've spoken on this issue, and maybe even sometimes tonight, I get taken over by the anger, by the outrage, by the anguish. Well, you can't convince anybody when you're coming from a position of rage, because it makes them feel threatened. So all I can say to you is, if you have anybody in your life, I'm not talking about the organizations, because organizations are committed to the ideological perspective, and they'll do anything to maintain that. And they'll do anything to suppress any alternative voices. Let me tell you, there's real censorship in this country. I know doctors in British Columbia who've been threatened with the loss of their hospital positions because they spoke about Palestine. So I'm not talking about the organizations. They just have to be stood up to. And their propaganda that it's anti-Semitic to speak about this with an open heart is anti-Semitic. But individuals, if there are people in your life, individuals, and a lot of good people can believe all kinds of false realities. If there's any opening, you have to speak to these people with an understanding of where they're coming from, of the historical fear, the historical suffering that informs their own way of seeing the world. And you have to speak from a position of truth and of some compassion for them as well. Again, I'm not talking about politically or organizationally, I'm talking about the individual human level. And ultimately, you have to accept what the Quran says, that God will only change people who want to change themselves. Thanks for listening again.
So, the last questioner, can you please see Sid? Sid, can you please stand up so they recognize who you are?
We're organizing outreach and pressure on politicians. We're not trying to change their ideas. We're trying to change their behavior. And we're making individual outreach to members of the We're making individual outreach to members of the legislature. We're pressuring them, and we need numbers of allies. Please see me about this.
Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah, we're very fortunate to have such speakers take out time out of their busy schedule, and alhamdulillah, it shows that, we have many great organizations here locally and international who are doing a great deal of work. Just before we break for Salatul Maghrib and the Muslim prayer, I would like just to inform everyone. So inshallah, for the brothers, we'll be praying Salah over on that side, so towards my left or your right. And for the sisters, it will be on this side. And also, please support our vendors and check them out. They are located to the right of the stage, just over there, those booths over there. And please visit Penny Appeal booth to complete your donation. Anyone who isn't fasting today, please help yourself to the buffet at the back of the hall. Because as you know, as soon as iftar time, it's going to get very busy. You have a lot of Muslims who are extremely hungry. So if you want to beat the rush, I would say go right now and enjoy your meal. While we are in the month of Ramadan, we are in the last 10 days. As our Prophet, peace be upon him, has informed us that any dua, any prayer that is made before the iftar or the breaking of the fast is surely accepted. So when we make dua, this is something that is a very powerful weapon for Muslims. Ad-du'a mukhul ibadah, that it is the essence of worship. Right? When we read Surah Al-Fatiha, you just look at the verses of Surah Al-Fatiha, there are verses that are asking Allah and asking Him to guide us. Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. So this is why we should be spending the next few minutes asking and imploring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His forgiveness. So inshallah, please join me as we make dua. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya Arhamar Rahim, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Ya Rabbil Alameen, all of us here today, Ya Allah, please forgive all of our sins. Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, you have seen us in this blessed month of Ramadan. We have been praying, we have been fasting, we have been reading and reciting the Quran, and we have been glorifying you. Ya Allah, please accept all of our efforts. Allahumma taqabbal minna qiyamana wa siyamana fi shahr Ramadan, Ya Rabbil Alameen. اللهم إنا نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. Our dear brothers and sisters in Palestine who are suffering, Ya Arham ar-Rahim, alleviate their suffering. Ya Allah, please give them peace, give them security. Please give them solace, Ya Rabbil Alameen. We cannot do anything except for your help, Ya Rabbil Alameen. We turn to you. There is no power or might except from you. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Ya Rabbil Alameen, we implore you, we beseech you. Ya Rabbil Alameen, this is the month of forgiveness. We are knocking on your doors of forgiveness, so forgive us, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ya Allah, turn your attention towards our brothers and sisters all over the world, not just in Palestine, but in Sudan, in Egypt, and all other places where there are brothers and sisters who are suffering, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Please forgive their sins. Please remove their sufferings, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Only you are the one who can do this, and we ask for your forgiveness, Ya Rabbil Alameen. We are weak, you are almighty. You are perfect, we are imperfect, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Whatever we have done in this month, please, whatever we have done in this month for worship, please accept. And whatever shortcomings and mistakes we have made, Ya Allah, please forgive us. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
Sorry, we got a minute left actually. Some of us broke our fast before time, including myself. Someone passed me a glass of water and I just took a sip.
Yeah, that's why I didn't drink it.
Yeah. Can you tell me when the time is 33? Just going to give the prayer call and then you guys can break your fast, inshallah.
30 seconds. It's 7:33 somewhere.
Should I start?
Just wait 15 more seconds, and then you can call it out. Yeah, Bismillah, Bismillah.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا